you need people from a great variety of backgrounds. And when you don't have that, I think there is a bit of a problem, because there's not the real knowledge and sort of hands-on experience of different parts of business or the different parts of the public sector, the different professions and so on. And we're the poorer as a parliament when we don't have that.
Back in Parliament with another veteran in politics, and this week's guest is Andrew Selous, who I first met as a wet behind the ears Conservative Party agent back in 2007, I think it was, when I was working for the now Lord Tim Boswell, who, and I think that was my first ever visit to Parliament. So great to be back. Andrew, how's your day? You've had PMQs today?
Yes, was in PMQs. I've been looking after an overseas visitor, which has taken up quite a lot of the morning, but that's gone well, from a Commonwealth country, which I have a role in supporting. So that's been good. Had a very good meeting just now with the Education Secretary on apprenticeships, which is a really big area over in Downing Street, and just catching up with the email at the moment.
I think in that short paragraph we've got a bit of a whistle-stop tour for an MP's day in the life of there, but when it comes to PMQs, you must have done hundreds of them. Does it ever feel different?
Well, I think when the deputies are there rather than the principals, it is definitely a different atmosphere, understandably. And I always say that PMQs generates rather more heat than light, is my shorthand phrase of it. It's sort of two medieval armies, isn't it, confronting each other, sending out their champions and, trying to take chunks out of each other in sort of military terminology, I suppose. But nonetheless, there is often quite a lot of information that comes out from the government side on what has been happening, and I think my constituents expect me to be there as well, and that's important to them, actually, and I'm always amazed how many people watch it, actually.
Yeah, they still do. And so we always like to start our podcast going right back to the beginning with the military connection, the military story. And you served for a number of years in what was the TA and now the Army Reserves, and balancing a civilian career at the same time. How was that for you? Because I know from personal experience it's difficult to balance the family, civilian career and the Army Reserves as well.
I think you're right. I think it's possible to be a reservist, if work is sort of not massively demanding. It's possible to be a reservist if family is not massively demanding. I think when the work and family are very demanding, then it can be extremely challenging. But I absolutely loved my time in the reserves. I joined as soon as I went to university, so quite wet behind the ears, 19. Bit of a shock to the system, but I sort of muscled up, I suppose, started running every morning, sort of got a bit fitter than I had been, and really loved it, and carried on, did about 12 years in total. Started off in the Honourable Artillery Company, then went to the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, Regiment I had a sort of family connection with, and absolutely loved it. Wouldn't have changed it for the world, and feel very, very grateful to have had the opportunity to serve.
HAC, a great network. We did a podcast recording at the HAC's Business Network at Armoury House. What a fantastic place, full stop, steeped in history. Of course, they have their own Act of Parliament as well to protect the Honourable Artillery Company as well. So if you haven't heard about the HAC, do look them up. I've still yet to get to the HAC Summer Ball, so if any of our listeners are open to invitations, let's just say. But no, great fun, and I should imagine it was great fun for you, that 12 years or so in the Army Reserves, in the infantry as well, as a former infanteer myself. Great role. I
mean, I started off the HAC, had an artillery observation post role. I got my Special Forces black lanyard, did all the Brecon marches in the middle of the night with rucksacks, timed over Pen y Fan and all of that, which I absolutely loved, actually, and very exciting as a young man, when the heaviest thing you pick up all week is a calculator, to be chucked off the back of a 4-tonner on a Friday night and told that breakfast is a couple of mountain ranges away the next morning, that is just wonderful, really exciting, and I felt a very good antidote to London life when I was young and single.
That's the infamous patrols course, right? Correct. I think they would call it. Yeah. There's a great podcast called the Unconventional Soldier by a couple of ex those types, and they get there's a brilliant episode on the HAC and talk about that particular course. It seems like I'm promoting other people's stuff, particularly the HAC today, but that's all part of the network. And in terms of your political career, you began in Sunderland North, and there's this term they use in politics, which I think's a bit unfair, but I can't think of a better one, but they call it a no-hoper seat, where as a fresh new parliamentary candidate, you go and fight an unwinnable seat, but you cut your teeth campaigning. And for you, it was up in the northeast, and the same year as that Labour landslide in 1997.
It was, but funnily enough, I mean, I really enjoyed that Sunderland North campaign in 1997. They say that I fought Sunderland North, and the sort of shorthand joke is that Sunderland North fought back, as they say. I wasn't elected on that occasion, but there was lots of good economic news. There were big new business parks opening up. There was a lot of investment coming to the northeast, and I think we were going to be voted out more or less whatever happened. But it was, I remember trying to fight quite a positive campaign actually, and the local party were kind enough to sort of commend my campaigning efforts, and I think that was probably what helped me be selected for my current constituency at the following 2001 general election.
What did you learn about campaigning? I'm a former Conservative Party agent myself, so I fought general elections, but it's really interesting to hear from you as the candidates. What did you learn in those early days?
I think just the importance of connecting well with people on the doorstep, listening well, making your campaign local, making it relevant, coming in with an offer that speaks to people in that area in terms of what they want. And, I've tried to keep on learning. Obviously, campaigning has changed a lot coming into the social media age. Not sure always for the better, sadly. I think it's quite nasty, social media sometimes, but you can't avoid it. Just sort of contact with people, listening well, being part of the community, and trying to be relevant to people's lives and their needs.
And tapping over the Brecon Beacons sets you up well for doorstep.
Yes, it's funny. On my first two elections, I think we had very new children, and my wife's mother commented that every time there was a general election, my wife Harriet seemed to have another baby. But so that was possibly a little bit of truth about pushing a pram along the street as well. But I think one of the things about the armed forces is that you do mix with people from every part of society. I was rubbing shoulders, someone who'd some middle class background, been to university. As a Fusilier, certainly, I was, mixing with people from a very wide range of backgrounds. Wonderful, fantastic people. When you're bottom of a trench together, you really get to know each other. So I think that was a big advantage actually politically as well. And perhaps people who'd had sort of conventional sort of educational route going on to university might not have had that breadth of experience of working really closely with people from very different educational career routes and so on.
Perhaps we'll pick up on that last point about people that have sort of go straight from university into politics in a second, but certainly with the Fusiliers, a great close affinity to the northeast, that must have also helped, because deep community ties with that particular regiment as well.
Yes, very much so, and I keep up my link with the Fusiliers. I was at a lunch in the Tower of London, our regimental headquarters, with the Speaker recently. In fact, they had a lunch for all the different areas where the regiment recruits, so North East Lancashire, Warwickshire, London. So yes, our regimental system, has very, very deep roots in different parts of the country, which is great, and long may that continue.
Yeah, it's worth reminding ourselves about that as well. Indeed, my own regiment, the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, has camps out at the Tower of London as well these days. So it was good to go and visit RHQ a couple of years ago. But on the... Obviously, you had been in industry, you'd been in industry, and then you looked at politics. But there seems to, I think 18% of our MPs are made up of sort of the special advisor class, loosely termed, and former politicos. And I think they even outnumber lawyers these days in Parliament. Do you think the route has changed since your day?
Well, if it hasn't, I think it needs to. I think we need people from a great variety of backgrounds. We need people with sort of quote-unquote real-world experience. So, if you've been a teacher, I've just been in a meeting on apprenticeships, One of my colleagues is a former teacher, so speaking with great authority, and actually Secretary of State for Education, I think is the only degree apprentice in the House of Commons. So she didn't get to university. I mean, she's graduate level, but she got that by starting on the factory floor at the age of 16, no university fees, working her way up, and ended up employing people who've been to Oxford and INSEAD and other great institutions. So you need people from a great variety of backgrounds, and when you don't have that, I think there is a bit of a problem, because there's not the real knowledge and sort of hands-on experience of different parts of business or the different parts of the public sector, the different professions and so on, and we're the poorer as a parliament when we don't have that.
Yeah, this is something you picked up on with Sir Mike Penning, one of your neighbours, of course, not far from your constituency, and his background, from 16 joining the army to becoming a Knight of the Realm, and having served as a minister as well, is, I think, that story of aspiration. We need to see it in our politics, no matter what party we look at, so we can encourage to get that mix. Obviously, I evangelise over getting military community, and that includes spouses, reservists, regulars, into Parliament. We do quite well though. I think we're almost about 50 have a military connection, so percentage wise we're well represented, but the balance of other ranks is something we need to champion, particularly in Parliament.
It is. So we've also got my colleague Stuart Anderson, who's quite senior in the Government Whip's office. He was a rifleman before he was elected, which is excellent as well. He's an outstanding colleague, has a very responsible job at the moment. So we do have some examples of people who've come up through the ranks and into Parliament, and that's great actually. And I was in the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards Museum in Edinburgh Castle over the weekend. I was looking at so there's one private soldier who became a field marshal, Robertson I think was his name. But we need more of that sort of pull through, don't we, all the way through the system.
Absolutely, and Stuart's a great example. Friend of the show, we've had a chat with Stuart before. I first met in a lift at party conference, I think I saw a rifles RGJ tie, I think, recognised it, we were chatting in a lift. He said he was a parliamentary candidate, so pre-election, so it's great to see him so visible in politics as well. And I mean, you've been a Minister of State yourself for prisons, under the Cameron government, and I was listening to a podcast, I think it was Michael Gove speaking, and no, it was Roy Stewart and Michael Gove mentioned it, both of them, about how that brief within sort of the justice side of it is probably one of the most challenging yet most rewarding.
I think prisons definitely get into your blood. I was also in charge of probation, which is incredibly important. We don't often talk enough about the importance of probation as well. But I was very passionate about rehabilitation, because if people go to prison, come out and commit more crime, then you've not solved the problem, and that's a danger to the public still. So the rehabilitation argument, to me, just seemed to make massive sense on every level. It was the right thing to do. Anyway, but in terms of keeping the public safe, incredibly important. So I absolutely loved that brief. I did it for 2 years, almost to the day. I'd have loved to have gone on doing it. In fact, I was with a former prison governor a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying, I think at the beginning of each parliament, the prisons minister should get, a 5-year sentence to do that job. And of course, other MPs would get sort of jealous. How come their ministerial positions, protected? Because there's always a lot of ambitious people coming out the ladder wanting ministerial positions. But I do think this governor had a point actually, because you have people who've been in the prison service for 30 years, and then you get a new minister, and there's a lot of churn. It takes you as a minister at least a year to work out what's going on, and then it's only then you can start really to get under the bonnet, as it were, and try and sort of steer things for the better. But it was a brief I absolutely loved. Yes, it's challenging. A lot of people would think it's not glamorous. I thought it was a huge privilege to do it. And people don't know enough about what goes on in prison. And actually, one of my children is now a prison officer, which I'm extremely proud about. And actually, whilst I'm passionately proud of all veterans, I don't think we do nearly enough for prison officers in our public life, who will often have the bruises down their arm of, the restraints that they've been involved with in the week, and they've had to deal with very difficult things. I mean, they're, so probably more difficult week by week, than actually the armed forces have to face in a peacetime environment. And I don't think they nearly get the recognition they deserve. They're a uniformed service of the Crown. So I was particularly pleased actually at the coronation. One of the lines in the procession was made up, I think, of the ambulance service and the prison service and the police. And that was absolutely right. We must always celebrate what our armed forces do, but just remember there are other uniformed forces of the Crown who have an absolutely vital function, keeping us safe and protecting us as well, and still remain very passionate about that.
Yeah, it's probably something I've overlooked, to be honest with you, the prison service, because they do their operational service day in, day out, and then they go home, that transition from work to home. Whereas at least us, when we go away on operational tour, we have a period of post-operational tour leave. That's something that was brought in relatively recently, but those guys and girls, day in, day out, as you've eloquently described, they don't have that. And I was pleased to hear that too, see that at the coronation. And certainly I think that's another part of society, publicly spirited, service-driven people that could do a really good job serving in local government when they hang up or their civilian careers, and add so much value because they're service-driven too. So yeah, let's not overlook them. Of course, I always evangelise the armed forces, but equally I'll evangelise for those in public service too. Another role that you've done as well is that of the role of a parliamentary private secretary, or a PPS. Can you tell us a little bit about what does that involve? And you did it with Sir Ian Duncan Smith, no less.
I did, yeah. No, I worked for Ian for 4 years. I was quite a long-serving parliamentary private secretary when he was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, bringing all the big welfare reforms, introduction of universal credit, and so on. And that was a great honour to do that. It was a very exciting time in the department. There was a lot going on. So the role of a parliamentary private secretary really is to be the bridge between Parliament and the department, in terms of if there are MPs who are unhappy about what the department's doing, they want to raise issues privately, rather than just at the monthly departmental oral questions or through written questions or in debates where it's all a bit public. But often, talking privately, you can get into the nuts and bolts of what's actually happening and why. The MPs can understand the constraints that the department's working under, why they can't change things immediately, and so on. And it's very important that the department understands what the concerns are within Parliament about what they're doing. So you're a facilitator of those conversations. You have a role in debates in the chamber and in Westminster Hall. You literally ferry the notes from the officials in the box to the ministers. If there are difficult questions being asked, or the minister hasn't said something quite right, they need to correct on the record or whatever. Maybe that all happens electronically these days. I'm not quite sure, but I think there is definitely a role, for a physical presence and slapping a bit of paper down next to the minister to say, just giving a bit of extra relevant information, or putting something a little bit more accurately maybe than the minister described it. But great experience. You have a civil service pass. So, you don't get paid anything in the role, but you are part of the government machine. You have access to the department. You're at the weekly ministerial meetings, so you're very well briefed. You know what's going on. You know what the struggles are in terms of what the department is trying to achieve, and how they're trying to do that. So it's a very privileged position in terms of access and information. And it's your role, just to say, to sort of facilitate those conversations between members of Parliament and government ministers in that department.
And great for your work in the constituency as well, given the amount of things DWP related that you deal with day in, day out in your post bag. Okay. Massive advantage there. But Ian Duncan Smith as well had the enormous privilege of sitting down with Sir Ian. Must have been fantastic to work with. That's definitely his passion project, right?
No, Ian is a great guy. He has enormous stamina. He was very passionate about what he was doing. He was on a mission really to change lives for the better. He was very upfront about that. I think he was a very skillful politician, in that if he had to do something difficult in the department, he would spend time explaining to the public what the problem was, and then when he came up with a solution, the public could say, oh, so you're doing this because you had to fix that, and they made the link. He would call it pitch rolling, And I think sometimes not all of my colleagues in government are quite as good at doing that. So one or two of them could probably learn from Ian in that respect.
And the role you've got now is within the Second Church States Commissioner for Parliament. I mean, it's not a role that I'm particularly read into, but what does that entail? And perhaps more widely, what's the relationship? We know we have bishops in the House of Lords, for example. What's that role of religion more widely within our politics and your role in particular? Right,
so because we have an established church, which a long time ago was voted some money by Queen Anne back in 1704, called Queen Anne's Bounty, and because the established church has various privileges, as you say, 26 bishops in the Lords, church schools, a quarter of all primary schools in the whole of England are run by the Church of England, so we educate 1 million children every day in our schools. We probably have more youth workers than all local authorities combined, and of course there is a parish priest, throughout the whole of England, in areas where often there are not many other professionals living. And quietly the work that goes on in the parishes week by week, I think is absolutely phenomenal, and that's the bit that people often don't see, and that's the bit that I try and sort of name check really and pay tribute to the work of those parish priests week by week in the Commons. So because of the privileges of establishment, there is commensurate accountability with the role of the established church. So that means there's always one MP from the governing party who is accountable to the House of Commons for the Church of England. So next Thursday I'll be answering oral questions on the Church of England. I have a 20-minute slot, share it with one or two other people, but I'll get typically 6, 7, 8 questions in those 20 minutes. I also answer written questions, just like a government department. There's only me, a very small team in church office. I think people realise that sometimes. And the Church of England has an endowment fund. That's what the commissioners run, and that pays the income from the capital gain from that pays for about 20% of the running costs of the church. But we try and run that very, very ethically and run that well. So that's really what the role entails. I was asked if I would do it, and I believe if I'm asked to serve, my response should be yes. So I do that. I'm also a trade envoy to 2 countries as well, to South Africa and Mauritius. That's about boosting trade and investment between those 2 countries. So I love being a minister, huge privilege, and I'm very content with the things which I do now as well.
It's clear you enjoy the role, right?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's a massive privilege to do this role. It is extremely challenging in that I think there are 17 different local issues I am trying to sort out for my constituents. All of those will have national, implications as well. So the local and the national I find merge, but I'm always driven by what is of concern to my constituents locally, and then those are the issues that I go in and raise in Parliament week by week and talk to ministers about. But it's a huge privilege. It's very, very interesting. A week or so ago, I had a constituent who was the victim of multiple identity theft on his driving licence. So he was an HGV driver, and there were people who were giving his driving licence details when they got a speeding offence. So he had all these tickets, he'd lost his licence, he couldn't work, couldn't feed his family, and actually he was completely stuck between the courts and the police and the DVLA, and he came to see me twice in my surgeries. I didn't manage to make progress for him initially. I wrote letters and so on. I spoke to the roads minister. We had a meeting in the department. We got all the officials on the screen. We have now solved that. And this guy got his licence back. He's back on the road. It's one and more HGV driver the economy desperately needs. He can feed his family again. He left with a smile, about a mile wide. And that's just such a privilege, isn't it, to be able to help sort someone out like that. And, I think other MPs could and would have done the same. But I think it did take the intervention of a member of Parliament, this happened to be me, being concerned enough, not accepting sort of no for an answer or determined to get a solution, that sort of grabbed the minister by the lapels, and a fantastically helpful roads minister, Richard Holden, could not have been more helpful, totally got it, and was very clear with his officials that he wanted a solution. And we solved that. So that's just one guy. It hasn't made the national headlines, hasn't even made the local headlines. But, when I go to sleep at night, incredibly proud, to be able to do work like that and to be able to help people like that.
Do you know what? When I do these interviews, I always ask the big questions. What was it like being a minister? But it never fails to amaze me the enthusiasm, genuine warmth, and passion that I hear in these interviews when you tell stories like that, because people have their own thoughts and ideas about what MPs do and their own opinions, but actually it's this stuff that they need to hear, because guess what, someday it might be them writing to their MP. I've written to my MP asking for help on serious matters, and they've been there, and I think that our relationship as constituents of our MPs is really important. And of course there's, we can't name names, but we can talk about these stories in general terms so we can relate to that and know that still, no matter what they see on the TV and campaigns and all the rest of it, at the heart of it are people like you that care, and that are there for them and that will change their lives. And I'm proud that we can share those stories on this podcast, quite frankly. But you have been MP for a number of years now. I kind of gave away the punchline earlier on in the introduction, having met all those years ago, and you've been in successive coalition governments, Conservative governments, in opposition. You stood in 97. What do you see as the main issues that your party will take to the public as we get ever closer to that general election?
I think these things often come back to the economy, don't they, and how much money we're able to generate in taxes to pay for all the things that we care about. And your ability to have a sustainable and growing tax base does come down to having more businesses starting up and helping those businesses flourish. And for me, it's all about prosperity with a purpose, which is taking that tax revenue and using it as effectively as possible to give people a really good health service, really good education, enough police officers, roads you can drive on, decent armed forces, prison officers, and so on. So I think that really gets to the heart of it. You can only spend the money that the country has earned, and I think our essential pitch really will be that we are doing the hard and difficult work, on the skills training, on the capital investment. At the Chancellor's speech at the Mansion House on Monday night, just been with the Education Secretary looking at the work we're doing on institutes of technology and T-levels and degree apprenticeships and all of this, to provide the skills. And there's not a lot of poverty in households where someone goes from £10.50 an hour to £22.50 an hour, but they're a skilled electrician. Not much child poverty in that household. They can pay their gas and electricity bill, and that's got to be the name of the game, I think. So I think it will be messages like that, and it's a lot of sort of fire and wind and shouting in politics, but we don't have a decision. We're not in a general election at the moment, and I hope people will sort of look and think about who's best placed to actually help businesses start, businesses grow, provide the job opportunities for their children, so we can pay for all the things we care about to be a decent and humane society.
And there might be a few new faces popping up in our politics as well in the next general election, because we're going to make the decision as the voters, and across party. And as you see these new faces pop into politics, what would be the kind of words of advice that you might give? I know there's a number of veterans within our network, within Campaign Force, that are putting themselves forward and have been successfully selected as candidates, and they've got it all to learn, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think you should only come into this game if you love your country. It's old-fashioned language, but veterans instinctively get it. If you think you can make a contribution to our national life, if you really have a heart for service and helping individuals, sorting out big constituency-wide issues, and there are a few things in our national life that you are passionate about and want to make a difference to and want to bring changes to. So I think those are the key things you need. Lots of stamina, sense of humour, but service people tend to have that in spades. And when you get here, you cannot be a master of absolutely everything, so you probably need to specialise. My advice would be specialise in the areas which are priorities to your constituents, because you may be interested in lots of things, but if your constituents aren't quite as interested in them as you, they may choose someone else rather than you to represent them and find someone who's more interested in what they're concerned about. So I think sort of general tips like that, and not to be fazed really by by the workload, it can seem quite unrelenting, but you get more efficient at dealing with it, and then just sort of realising you can cope day after day with it.
Andrew Selous, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.